So earlier this year, IAB Australia, we launched our AdTech Advisory Group. This was a really important move for us because it aligned with our Big Tent strategy and focus and really ensuring that we represented the entire industry. One of our founding members of the AdTech group is AppNexus, and now I'd like to introduce Dave Osborn, who's the Senior Vice President for Asia Pacific at AppNexus, to take us through the next half hour. Thank you to Dave.
I want to pick my own music next time. And that was, thank you for the promotion, Alice. That's, I'm just a VP, but I'll take the senior. It's fantastic. So thank you for that. Welcome, and hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here today. So they say that it's really important for you to know your audience, so I figure why not start like while I'm up on stage. So can I get a show of hands for the publishers in the room? So I know there's a lot. Yeah, so heaps. The agencies in the room, or desks in the room? All right, cool. Marketers. I just met one, so I know, yeah, all right. Networks. Ad networks? Does anyone call themselves an ad network anymore? All right, okay, that's cool. Ad tech firms. They're the networks. All right, so no, just kidding. So there's ad tech firms. Okay, cool, that's helpful. So for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name's Dave Osborn. As Alice said, I look after a significant chunk of AppNexus's business in Asia Pacific. AppNexus is a global technology firm. I joined the company in 2011 and was asked to build out the company's global accounts function and open up the company's first West Coast office in Seattle, Washington, which is where I'm from. And so I had the pleasure of working with some of our largest, most strategic customers around the world, and that work brought me to Australia at the beginning of 2014. I moved my wife and 3 kids down here, which was an experience in and of itself. But since I've arrived, I've spent a lot of time with many of you in this room and have had the great opportunity to spend time with leaders and see kind of firsthand what programmatic and technology is doing and is causing the changes that's causing to many of your businesses. And so with today being a leadership meeting, what I'm trying to do is to try to synthesize those observations that I've had over the last 4 years with AppNexus and a couple of years in Australia into some conclusions that I hope will be useful. So earlier this year, Brian O'Kelly, our CEO, put this quote and this page up in front of a bunch of AppNexus leaders. And it's a quote from one of AppNexus's earliest investors. And at the time, Brian was talking about some kind of material organizational and product strategy changes that we were talking about making. And a lot of us were kind of pushing back because things have been working pretty well at AppNexus, and frankly, this represented change. And Brian's point to each of us was very simple, right? It was our mission is to build a better internet. That's our job as a company. And in order to do that, we're gonna have to be really bold, even when it's quite scary. So 48 hours ago, I touched down back in Sydney after a week in New York, 3 days of which was a senior leadership offsite with AppNexus. In a rustic lodge in the middle of the woods, as offsites for some reason tend to be. And front and center for us were the changes, kind of again, material changes that we're gonna wanna make as we move into 2016. And all of these changes are gonna require significant courage and commitment from our leadership team. My guess is that all of you, most of you in this room, are facing kind of the same tests of courage and commitment in your businesses. And if you're not, then I don't think we're living on the same planet. Advertising is going through the significant, most dynamic and disruptive period in its history. And I think as leaders, you're facing increasing amounts of complexity, new competition in the space, and ever-increasing pressures to perform. And so what we see is some leaders and some companies responding to this through resistance, or by finger pointing, or by kind of pushing up new silos in their businesses. And that's an easy path, but it's not a winning one. And instead, my thesis is that doing the hard things and then doing them right is what creates structural competitive advantages for companies. So overall, my goal today is to try to spark some real conversation, not just on the break or kind of in drinks, but some sustainable dialogue between the industry and our participants. And the first thing I want to try to do, I've got 3 topics. First thing I want to do is share some perspective on the overall state of programmatic with a sprinkling of research from some results that we've done on a survey in partnership with IAB and Work. Number 2, is I want to talk about changes, material changes that I believe are coming and need to be made for publishers and agencies in this market and around the world in order to thrive or survive, depending on your perspective. And these are changes in people and changes in client engagement and changes in fundamental business models that are being driven by technology. And third is I want to end on a bright note by sharing some of the bright spots of leadership that are happening in this industry and around the world. So first off, some perspective. As you've already seen today, every presentation that mentions programmatic has to start with, let me see if I can advance that page, has to start with like some kind of statement. So it is programmatic, it's big, it's really big. And you've also seen that every presentation, not just in this room, but any presentation that mentions programmatic has an up and to the right chart, and so I made one, right? So it's big, right? All of the, literally it was easy to make, right? Hi, right. So all the research and data, in all seriousness, shows that programmatic advertising is going to kind of power 70 to 80% of digital advertising over the next couple or 3 years. That's material. But I would actually say that by 2020, which is the time period we're looking at, 100% of what we do is programmatic, right? It's just the way that we trade. And most of you agree. So 91% of the respondents in our survey in Australia said that programmatic is going to be the important or dominant form of digital advertising. But we still, and even today, and I get it, spend a lot of time talking about blockers. And my thesis is that the stumbling blocks that we're running into today, those are gone, and they're kind of gone in the very near future. So if we take fraud and inventory quality as an example, these issues are going to be solved. In fact, AppNexus now has a guarantee that sellers of bad inventory or fraudulent inventory won't be paid, and the buyers won't be charged. Right? These actions are effectively removing the incentives, the economic incentives from the ecosystem. And by doing so, what we're trying to do is create the most well-lit environment out there. And we think it should go a long way towards collapsing the businesses of bad actors and forcing them to either change or leave. Second is around mobile in a silo. Like, I think that's going to be a non-issue. We saw, again, up and to the right trends. Mobile's big. Marketers are buying across platforms today. Publishers are selling across platforms today. Like, I think that's going to be all good. Cross-platform identity and attribution, that's going to be solved. And I'm not going to tell you how, right? Because a lot of different companies are working on lots of different avenues to solve this. But you can count on technology and people and time to work these matters out. Now, the other thing that no one talks about, and this is a really evil slide, that guy's like really bad. But another thing that no one brings up, but it's a significant issue in this industry, is margin, okay? The shift to programmatic advertising doesn't actually create new dollars, right? It just changes the way in which people buy. And I don't think programmatic is driving profitable growth for publishers and, in many cases, agencies at this point anymore. In fact, I think it's robbing you in many cases of margin. And so when a dollar moves into programmatic, 20 or 30% of that dollar is reduced by just the companies powering the pipes, okay? And if you think about point solutions, viewability, verification, dynamic creative, attribution, what have you, that number goes to 40%, right? Just through technology. In my view, it's totally unsustainable. And I will tell you that AppNexus is going to go a long way towards effectively collapsing and compressing those margins that are being made. And viewability is a good example. A year ago, we bought a viewability firm. I think Randall mentioned earlier on that it needed to be platform integrated. We bought a viewability firm. It's integrated into our platform. It's free to anyone who uses AppNexus. It's just a core part of a platform. So anyway, over the next couple of years, we're going to work these things out. And what you'll see, and what all of us are going to see, is that programmatic's not a channel, right? It's not a strategy. It's just the way that we trade everything. But the thing that should keep all of us up at night is the fact that half of the respondents to our surveys feel uninformed or underinformed on programmatic still, right? So it's going to be everything, but half people still don't get it. And in my view, the spoils of complexity and that lack of information are not accruing to publishers and agencies and marketers in this space. Does anyone know the analogy of the frog in boiling water? Okay, I've tried this on a lot of Aussies and it hasn't always worked, so I'm going to talk you through this. So it's really sad, And so but just bear with me for a moment. So there's this notion, and this is a really cute frog too. So there's this notion that if you toss a frog into a pot of boiling water, like who the fuck would do that, by the way? Like that's really mean. But if you toss a frog in a pot of boiling water, it's going to jump out because go figure, it's hot, right? But if you put a frog in a pot of cool water and then turn up the heat, right, the thing's going to boil and it's going to get hot, and then by the time it realizes it should jump out, it's already overheated, so it dies. All right, it's gross, I'm sorry, but it'll help me tell a story, I promise. But you see there's this power play happening in programmatic, and it's happening between media and advertising companies, and it's being driven by technology, where you've got companies that are like the frogs in the water, right, and you've got companies that are turning up the heat, okay? And my observation is that the water's starting to get really warm for a lot of companies, and they should seriously consider jumping out. So first off, let me just put some context around that. What publishers and agencies and marketers want from programmatic isn't in and of itself creating this problem. Publishers want to use programmatic to drive better yield for the business, right? To create competition and drive some efficiency. Like, it's fairly reasonable. Agencies want to actually avoid competition, but want to use their buying heft to secure good rates from publishers and drive better results for their advertisers. And I think that the marketers really want to use programmatic advertising or digital advertising is just another digital consumer touch point. And that's reasonable too. So I don't think any of this thinking is unreasonable, but the disruption and the stuff that's driving some of the really hard changes in front of us is coming from global media companies who want to make media publishers and agencies and marketers reliant on their technology and their supply and their demand, so that they can rewrite the rules of advertising and content monetization and supply and content distribution. And that's what I mean when I say that the water is starting to boil. So what are these players to do? We'll leave our poor frog for now. So what are these players to do? I think that I would say that the waters of change are going to rise around you if you don't start to take action. And I think the two most critical areas where action needs to be taken is in organizations and business models. So let me spotlight a couple major transformations that I think are going to happen in the publishing space and in the advertising agency space that are driven by technology-enabled advertising. First of all, I believe that the commercial teams at publishers, inside the publishing community, those commercial teams need to really polarize. And what do I mean by that? On one hand, are going to be a small group of highly skilled, highly adaptable salespeople. Right? I think these people wind up looking in many ways like enterprise technology salespeople. Right? These are really big leaders, strong operators. They're highly adaptable. They're highly consultative. I don't know what that picture has to do with it because it looks like a kid teaching his dad how to use a computer. But so I'll work on that later. Sorry. And on the other side, this one does a little bit more justice. You've got traders. These are the quants. These are the teams. This is kind of the new ad ops. And I don't think it's actually the current ad ops. These are the people who are responsible for ripping through data and finding insights and communicating those to their clients. And they're going to find hidden pockets of audience and inventory that drive material value for the publisher. I think these guys and gals are the new heroes of media companies. And they can serve as the great equalizers of power. And if you think of these two groups as weights on either side of a barbell, then in the middle, I think you have a new breed of architect, who's the inventory or the audience architect. And these individuals bridge the gap between the quants and the new breed of media salesperson. And I think this was mentioned earlier on. I actually think these are the people that create consumer experiences and ad experiences that consumers don't want to block. So now let's flip to the buy side. And forgive me for saying this, but I think agencies are going to go through a massive transformation of their teams and approach, and I think they have to, because the attitudes are that agencies are less and less important. And in Australia, barely 50% of the people who responded to our survey thought that agencies needed to have kind of programmatic knowledge, and they thought that trend was going to continue. But even more alarming, people who responded to our survey thought it was less important now than it was 5 years ago for an agency to have a strong relationship with its publisher partners and its clients. And they thought that trend was going to continue. So hang on. So it's actually less important now for an agency to actually have good relationships with its publisher partners and its clients? If I ask the agencies in the room, if you agree with that, I think you'd probably say absolutely hell no, but these are real attitudes. And I think it's driven by this increasing skepticism or increasing question about what value is actually delivered to the client at the end of the day. And so what I think it comes down to is in that value add to marketers. First off, I think the media planning and buying function will become a sophisticated trading function. And I don't think there's any question about that. The application of audience data to the vast majority of campaigns and the use of the data that's thrown off the backs of those campaigns brings to mind to me a sophisticated new type of worker, not the kind that I think like custom trainers or designer jeans or mani-pedis are going to actually appeal to. I think these people are actually data scientists, right? And I think it's a pretty incredible new group of people. These are the folks working on prediction that Olivia mentioned earlier. Second is I think agencies need to reassert the relationship with its clients and remove all space between themselves and their clients. I think in many cases, and I think you're starting to see small pockets of this, agencies are actually going to embed substantial portions of their client teams on site with their customers in a way that starts to look and feel very similar to the kind of thing that Accenture did many years ago, started embedding people on site. Now, certainly everything with an agency is going to have a media and marketing bend to it, but in order for agencies to keep pace and deliver value with their customers, they're going to have to embed. And so the opportunity, if you're being generous, and the mandate, if you're not, is at that point for the agency to de-silo completely and to use all of the knowledge accumulated by buying programmatically across platform, and more importantly, using the data that is thrown off by buying programmatically across multiple platforms to the value of the client. And I think at that point, an embedded agency can help its client see around corners. And so you can imagine then why, as an example, a company like Google has to build a data management platform. Because if that DMP actually holds all of a marketer's data and it doesn't sit with the agency or the marketer themselves, then that agency has even a more significant existential risk than it does today. So if you think about competition for the agency now, it's no longer Google and Facebook, and sure as shit isn't the other holding companies. It's Accenture, it's PwC, it's IBM, right? It's Deloitte. And even locally, I think it's companies like Quantium and Red Planet who have sophisticated analytical capabilities and consulting capabilities, either grown or acquired. Traditional business models have been upended both by technology as well as kind of Silicon Valley giants. And so these publishers and agencies also have to diversify their business. And there's a lot of ways that this is going to happen, but here's a couple. First off, there's a growing group of us that like to say that everyone's a network. Right? And I don't mean that in the dirty way, like no one identified as a network, but like what I mean by that is that the providers, agencies and publishers have to start adding value beyond the intrinsic worth of the asset, right? So in the future, I think it's how you lever your company or your consumer or your partner data that generally drives a change. So for publishers, your brand I don't think is any longer enough to make it, right? Enough to drive the amount of growth that your investors are going to demand. I think publishers who sit on rich intent signals actually start to become data distributors and audience networks, and you're seeing this today. And this creates new and high-margin revenue streams for their businesses. And in many cases, these publishers are becoming buyers of media, right? They build sophisticated trading desks in-house. On the other side, you see agencies with massive trading heft in this market, Group M, Dentsu, locking up exclusive access to supply and data that makes them sticky to their customers. So an agency owning data and supply actually starts to make them look like a publisher. And more importantly, I think it allows the agency to centralize all yield and ad decisioning for all clients inside the group, rather than leaving that in the control of the hands of the publisher. So this is really happening. We have a new hire at our company, and all of his real-life training examples have been from sellers who want to buy and buyers who want to sell. Right, so this is actually happening. So if you believe even remotely some of these calls about organizations and business model changes that are going to happen, you start to get a sense of what's going on and what's going to be required. In my conversation with marketers around the world and in this market, or with marketers and clients around the world in this market, I think that winning and adapting comes down to three very fundamental choices. And at the Programmatic Summit in Sydney in March, I talked about these three things, and they're really hard to do. And at that time, I called them, I think, doing what matters. And today, it's hard things done right. And there's some really great examples of companies locally and globally taking this kind of action. The first thing is investing in your people, hiring people not from ad tech, right? Upskilling your current employee base, right? And mandating that they learn new skills. In March, I highlighted Xaxis, who I actually think is one of the great innovators in this market in terms of developing its people. Moving people who used to be kind of like ad ops folks to actually people who can code an API and are very sophisticated traders. And at the same time, I also highlighted that this represents a significant risk for companies like Xaxis, because the more diversified your employee base becomes, the more poachable they become to other companies, a lot of whom are sitting in this room. And that happened. Since March, a great Xaxis employee has left to go work for a publisher. That's not going to change Xaxis leadership's commitment to investing in their people one bit, I can assure you. And if you think more generally about the types of people that I've described that are going to characterize the future publisher and agency in this world, I've talked about publishers hiring enterprise-class salespeople and traders and solutions architects. I've talked about agencies being embedded with their clients or staffing with people hired out of like top-tier consulting firms. And I look around the audience, and I know that some of you have already hired some of these people. I'm not going to out you, but I know that this is actually happening. And if you're part of a company where you're not seeing these people being hired, then I would start to ask very tough questions. The second element is to lead with strategy. And I think strategy, providing a strong strategic vision for a business, is what gives the business a rudder, right? And it guides your choices. And one example, contemporary example I can give you, is just a couple weeks old when our president, Michael Rubenstein, was in town. We had the opportunity to sit with multiple chief executives of some of Australia's largest media firms and actually have a productive, long dialogue with them and their entire leadership teams about how technology and advertising technology can drive differentiation for those companies' businesses. This is now a decision that's sitting in the boardroom because these companies have realized that your choices in technology actually can either make or break your ability to run your business. Open versus closed. You've seen this probably from AppNexus before. It's worth mentioning again. You're seeing two very fundamentally different strategies play out around the world. On one hand, you have step 2 or 3 of a process that Google's on to ultimately close off a walled garden to anyone who doesn't use Google's tech or their network. Okay, and they didn't tell me that. I'm just assuming that's going to happen. And you see that happening with YouTube. On the other hand, you see a very different strategy, a company like AppNexus, that has made our bidder, our decisioning engine, fully programmable to all of its clients. You see Goldman Sachs, literally the top of the top tier of investment banking firms, opening up its trading platforms to its clients. These are two companies in nominally related industries that are taking assets that are actually, for other firms, proprietary black box intellectual property and opening them up to the market and to its clients and saying, build on top of it. Do what's right for your business. We think that's the way to go. Microsoft. Everyone says that Microsoft globally got out of the ads business, right, when they moved to it with AOL and AppNexus. But I think what Microsoft did was one of the more incredible deals that I've ever seen. They didn't get out of the ads business. They got out of an incredibly unprofitable hand-selling business. And they're making a bet that programmatic becomes the profitable way of monetizing Microsoft's assets. Oh, and by the way, they got a 10-year deal for Bing at the expense of one of their mortal enemies through AOL. Closer to home, congratulations to the Huffington Post for launching in Australia. Very, very cool. What you may or may not know is that Dentsu Aegis has secured exclusive access to HuffPo Australia inventory for many, many, many months to come. This forward position by the group represents I think, a clear execution of a strategy around publisher partnership, around generating exclusive benefits for the group, and from a technology perspective, I think creates phenomenal opportunities to give people around the world a view at what the future of allocation and inventory inside an agency looks like. Last bit is to play the long game. I use this phrase a lot. And to me, it's about avoiding bright, shiny objects, right? And going where your clearly defined strategy takes you. These three are going to be disruptive, right? And if I can pick on Quantium for a moment, I don't know if they're in the room, but I'd say it if they were. It's a good example of placing multiple long bets and playing the long game. So building a trading desk and killing the agencies, like, no, that's not going to happen, right? And a bit of a course correction there. But distributing data to Facebook and News Corp, yeah, that's probably got some legs, right? And picking multiple other leaders. Offering consulting services for major buyers on top of that, yeah, that probably makes sense. Is any of this going to happen overnight? No, and it represents material changes to their business over the long term. And I would say similar things about Red Planet or Kohl's. These are all very long bets. Group M Connect. Group M Connect is the programmatic buying function inside WPP that you've read about. It's a disclosed trading function Group M offers to its clients. It's different from the highly successful Xaxis, right? And it addresses very different clients and their needs. But it's an extremely big forward bet as part of, I think, a fairly cohesively executed and articulated strategy. And I think it's going to drive significant value for WPP and help them support their entire client base over the long term. And then you've got Apex, MBX, Pangea. These are examples of traditional competitors, and in some cases enemies, coming together to confront a far greater threat to their independence, and frankly, the future of journalism and media in Australia. Are these moves going to blunt Facebook or Google overnight? Of course not. But can they have a serious impact? Absolutely. In France, publisher coalitions have emptied all premium inventory out of the mass exchanges. So there you have it. If you look at how media companies and agencies are going to have to adapt, what does it come down to really? It comes down to these simple three. Number one, investing in your people. T-shaped people who can be wide and go deep. Enterprise salespeople, consultants, data scientists. Making strategy a point of differentiation for your organization and playing the long game and placing big bets and taking multiple big swings. It's simple to say, it's really hard to do. And if I think back to my opening, I think about our CEO's mandate to all of us many months ago. What I think he was saying is, look, guys, what got us to the position that we're in over the last 8 years is not going to be the same set of ingredients that make us successful over the next 5. And it's really scary, but I think that his point is if we do the hard things and we do them right, we can win. And I think the same is true for all of us. I want to thank Alice and Randall and the IAB and all the great folks at Aston Media, and thank you all for your time. Here's to leadership.
Timely, perfect timing in terms of turning up the heat. The frogs, I don't know, but we'll see. Do we have any questions for Dave?
Randall. Oh dear.
No, I think that was one of the best summary presentations I have seen on this subject on any stage, honest to God. I have one question that's almost like it's not meant to challenge you, but I really want to kind of get your impression on this. You have a very positive view about how the agencies are evolving along with the publishers. But historically, agencies, and with due respect to all the agencies in the room, have not had the capital structure that either publishing companies or technology companies have had to be able to invest significant amounts in technology or in talent. And if you go back in history, agencies gave up third parties, core technologies, to Donovan Data Systems and the back end of television, to Nielsen and metrics. So what have you seen that's changed that allows agencies to do the kind of technology and talent investments that would keep them competitive with, say, Silicon Valley technology companies on the one hand, or very well-funded media companies on the other hand?
Yeah, look, so that's a really easy question to answer. Thanks for that. So the question that Randall just asked was a completely unfucking answerable question. So, so I will say that you're right that this is a positive note of what I think needs to happen. I actually think that what's probably going to happen is you're going to have more marketers pull their business out of agencies and bring it in-house, and that's what's actually going to cause disruption and cause a lot of these companies, not all of them, cause a lot of these companies to react, right? And I think that at that point, how it actually happens, I'm not sure. I do want to go on record. I don't think that agencies should own technology necessarily for the most part. I think that technology is a commodity. I think they just need to make the right choices on that. And I do think as well that like if we as technology firms can give margin back to the agencies and to the marketers, then there's more money in the system and less money in intermediaries' pockets. And that's got to help as well, but it's sure as hell not an overnight thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. All set.
Think about there. Perfectly timed. You're leaving. Thank you very much. Dave will be here for the rest of the day, so please stay tuned.